The trickle has become a flood. This time on Poll Hub, almost a month into the U.S. government shutdown, a host of new polls show who voters are blaming, including a brand new poll from us and our partners at NPR and the PBS NewsHour. We'll talk about it and what it may mean for the president and Democrats in Congress. Then, in this era of women ascending in politics and business and elsewhere, new research into how they feel about the economy and their personal finances. Interesting data from the team at Edison Research, and Edison Vice President Meyn is here to walk us through it. Washington may be shut down, but Poll Hub is a go. And hi, everybody. Welcome to Poll Hub. I'm J.D. Dapper, Director of Innovation here at the Marist Poll.
And I'm Barbara Carvalho, Director of the Marist Poll.
And I'm Lee Marigoff, Director of the Marist College Institute for Public Opinion.
We're on episode 77, 78. Which one are we on?
78.
78. I'm guessing that before we get to episode 100, the government shutdown will be over. I'm hoping for it, but it has now been almost a month that it's been going on. Record. And there weren't many early polls because it started over the Christmas break, so the holiday break.
Well, not only that, I mean, I know one of the reasons why we weren't in the field initially is because most shutdowns haven't lasted all that long.
Yeah.
And if you're going to be doing some serious research about what people think about it, you want to give them a few days to think about it and also to be able to do the poll.
So the good news is it's been going on so long, we were able to do a poll.
And not only that, I mean, pretty much everybody has done a poll. All the public pollsters have been out. And
they're showing pretty much the same thing. And I guess what we're seeing is folks around the country are not happy with this. They think it's going just a bad thing to have done strategically. And when it comes to pointing a finger, 54% in our national survey say they blame the president. 31% say they're blaming the Democrats in Congress.
And that's been pretty consistent across all of the public polls. The question wording has changed a little bit. But in this NPR and PBS NewsHour poll, which we did in partnership with both of those organizations, we found that, as you mentioned, the majority does blame the president. But I thought what was really interesting is we did ask a question about whether they felt that shutting the government down was a good or a bad strategy to get a consensus on a policy issue. Now, we didn't specifically say the wall because we didn't want to factor in whether people are for or against that. But I thought that was really interesting. You mentioned a lot of people thought it was a bad strategy, and it was 70%, including 53% of people who consider themselves and identify as white evangelical Christians that are a major part of the president's base.
Well, even Trump supporters, and when we break down polls and look at lots of subgroups. One of them that always stands out when you're talking about politics is the Trump supporters. Even more than white evangelical Christians, Trump supporters are going to be supporting Trump, right? I mean, that's kind of the definition.
Well, yeah, those are people who say that they did vote for him in 2016.
Right, so 30% of self-identified Trump supporters think it's a bad strategy. And that same number, and this struck me, the Trump supporters really strikes me in a couple of these other questions. When we asked if they felt more positive or negative towards President Trump, 15% of the people who voted for him, the Trump supporters, say they feel more negatively about him because of this shutdown.
And we're going to talk a second about what this has done for his overall popularity. But you raised one interesting point in there. You said in the question about strategy, we intentionally did not use the word wall.
Right.
And I think that's a good kind of polling insight in terms of question wording. Had we said wall, we'd be measuring Donald Trump's approval rating because he's so identified with that. So the better question to ask is just a sense of, is this a good way to kind of make policy or not, and does the shutdown work towards improving things?
Yeah, and I don't think we didn't mention either the president or the Democrats in that question either. One other point I did want to just address on this was the fact that shutdowns generally are not popular. And both the presidents and the Congress lawmakers who get in the midst of this kind of a shutdown issue have all seen that Americans just really have a negative feeling about them at the time and during that process.
Yeah, and I just teased that we'd be seeing the implications of this for the president himself in his overall approval rating. And I think that was interesting. We're seeing this in other polls as well, that his approval rating in our polls went from 42 to 39. And as you had indicated, some key groups in the president's base, and this is something we're going to have to be looking at in future polls, showed a little cracking there in terms of white evangelicals, in terms of Republicans, in terms of some groups that he's done well with electorally and have supported him. White men who don't have a college education has been a group for him in the past, and that's a group that also now is showing a little less favorability towards him. Is this short-term tied to the wall? Tied to the shutdown? We don't know in terms of the fall in his popularity, but we're certainly going to find out down the road and keep a close watch on it.
It is worth noting that Democrats take a hit too. Congressional Democrats, 52% of adults felt more negative towards Democratic leaders in Congress. So nobody gets out of this.
Although their overall approval rating has gone up for handling the congressional Democrats.
But it's nothing to write
It's
home
nothing
about.
to write home
I
about.
mean, both Republicans and Democrats were at a 23% approval rating when we last asked this
And now
last
they're
summer.
in the 30s.
Yeah, now they're in the 30s, which looks like an enormous jump, but it still means that a majority of Americans are not happy with what's going on in Washington.
But a more negative impression of President Trump, 61%, a more negative impression of Democrats, 52%. And that's sort of the difference between Democrats and Republicans. You know, there's more
So, of
Democrats.
course, we're asking a national poll, and, we couldn't resist the, kind of venturing into 2020.
We could have resisted, but Lee is not going to allow for that.
Well, there's a lot of fans
Look,
just
all
finding
these
out.
people saying they're forming exploratory committees. We got a right to
And we've
find
got
out.
folks
When are
already-
you announcing your exploratory
I will
committee,
not
Lee?
run. You know the answer to that. If nominated.
Well, we did have a long list, but instead of asking, whether Democrats are going to be supporting, which candidates they're going to be supporting, and if there are Republicans that may be, challenging the president, what we did was we took a list of folks who may be interested, and some who already
on the Democrat side.
on the Democratic side. Well, we asked a couple of Republicans too. We just asked, what the party faithful think about these candidates and whether they have a favorable or unfavorable impression of them.
Democrats, regarding the Democrats who are sort of looking this over, have already jumped in, very favorable to most of them, less known for some. Joe Biden has a 76% favorability rating and a 12% unfavorable score, and that is the widest ratio that anyone has. So should Biden get into this, he certainly on the Democratic side starts out as the front runner, but it's going to be a big crowd following him around the quarter
Well, he's
pole.
most known, but I thought what was interesting about that is he's been in Washington for so long, and to have that low a negative 12%, and again, this is just among Democrats and Democratic-leaning independents, but still, I thought that was a very low, unfavorable rating, and certainly something that suggests that he would be the front runner should he decide to run.
Now, I think it was very interesting also on the GOP side, the reaction of people to a possible and potential and a likely Trump reelection campaign. His reelect number, 30%, 57% of people, registered voters, say they definitely won't vote for the president. That's a bad number for him, 30% to 57% on a reelect question at this point.
Well, I guess anything over 50%, if you think
the
about
negative
election
side.
on the negative side, is some concern. But President Obama, let's see, we had him.
He was at
a
net
similar
minus
time.
12 at 36 positive. Trump
Well,
is a net
36
minus.
reported that
Yep.
they would definitely vote to reelect President Obama, which is similar to the 30% now
bit
for
better,
Trump.
little bit
But
better.
I guess for President Obama, only 48% said they would definitely plan to
So
vote against him.
President Trump
And they
has-
ended up, 48% ended up voting against it.
Yeah, so, and you ended up, yes, so it's an important question, but you ended up with the President Trump having a net minus of 27, President Obama at this time having a net minus of 12.
And so the other thing, though, is we did venture in and ask Republicans whether they thought someone in the party should challenge the president. I thought this was interesting because it actually turned out to have the same numbers that President Obama had after the Tea Party debacle and his shellacking, as he characterized it, in November of 2010. And so Republicans divided about whether they wanted the president to have a primary challenge, as did Democrats at that time. So we did ask Republicans a little bit about some potential Republicans that might want to go in there. And one was Mitt Romney, who we found actually has a very high unfavorable rating, 48% among Republicans, and John Kasich. And Republicans divided on him.
And so there may not be a big groundswell of support for President Trump's reelection. There's a mixture on there. But you got to beat somebody with somebody. And right now on the Republican field, there is nobody who's making a significant inroad into I can be the non-Trump within the Republican Party. And this is not going to be the last poll for us. I think we're going to have a few more between now and you know when.
Oh, promises, promises.
So we often very much like to drill down into the data here on Poll Hub, and we look at different groups of people and demographics, and it's not surprising that men and women often have very different opinions on a lot of different topics. And to talk a little bit about how they may be seeing their own finances and the economy nowadays, and how that may be different, is Mary Meyn from Edison Research. She is vice president of Edison Research and part of their Marketplace project, which does research on the economy and all sorts of issues. Mary, welcome to Poll Hub.
Great, thanks for having me.
So tell us a little bit about this particular study that you guys actually just put out on the economic anxiety, I think you put it, of women in the economy.
Sure. Well, I'll start by telling you a little bit about Edison Research and this Marketplace study overall. So Marketplace is a national economic radio show that airs on NPR and is available as a podcast. And they talk about, it's a daily radio show talking about national economic issues. And they came to us a few years ago, and they wanted to get together with us to create a survey that they could track over time that measured Americans' opinions about their own personal financial situation and also how they're viewing national economic issues. Like the unemployment situation or policy proposals and things like that. So Marketplace, typically reports on things like the unemployment rate, the GDP, maybe how the stock market is doing or economies in Europe and things like that. But what they wanted to partner with Edison Research on is understanding, okay, how do average Americans and then different slices of demographics of Americans feel about their own personal financial situation, and how are they fitting into the overall economic narrative? And
so what was the key finding that you uncovered in this in terms of gender, perhaps?
Sure. So what we found, and we've been able to track this over time, we created something called the Economic Anxiety Index. And so what we've been able to do is measure just how anxious Americans are feeling about their own personal financial situation. And when we first conducted this study in September 2015, which is like, a million years ago, hard to even remember what it was like in September 2015.
Time flies.
Yeah, exactly. We found that our economic anxiety index score was 31. And as we measured this over time, it peaked at 36. And then in our most recent study, which we released in October of 2018, it has reached a new low of 30. So what we've just recently found in our most recent study is that Americans' anxiety is at a record low, or was at a record low, at least in October of 2018. But we've consistently found that women have a higher economic anxiety index score than men.
Is that simply a function of the fact that women in general have lower economic security than men in terms of wages, in terms of job security, things like that?
I think it's entirely possible. I mean, from our own survey, what I'm an expert in what my survey results are saying, and so what I'm seeing is within the anxiety index questions that we're asking, women are generally saying that women are more likely to say that they're losing sleep over their personal financial situation. They're more likely than men to not feel financially secure. They're more likely to fear not having enough money saved for retirement, or to fear not being able to pay their mortgage or their rent than men. But yeah, these could all be functions of just, generally women's job security and pay rate as compared to men sociologically.
And is this something that you've found consistently over time?
It has been fairly consistent, yeah. So I was just looking, women do typically have higher anxiety scores than men in each of the studies that we've done, although I did see that there was an instance of where men and women were tied. So they each, in the survey where it peaked, the anxiety index score peaked in October of 2016. Men and women both scored 36 on the economic anxiety index, but otherwise women have typically had a higher economic anxiety index score. So this is something that we're seeing as being persistent, that women are more anxious than men over many courses of the study.
Are you seeing any positives for women in relation to the economy? Not necessarily greater than men, but just more positive generally? Less anxious?
Just generally speaking, they women have improved their outlook. Their anxiety rate has come down. So as I was saying, the anxiety index score peaked at 36 in October of 2016, and both men and women have come down to a new record low in our most recent study. So men and women tend to track each other and track, the total, of course, but so there have been instances where women are feeling more positive, but they don't seem to ever outpace men.
Sure. So the gap remains persistent, regardless whether it goes up or down.
Are there any other differences that you see, either married women or single women? I mean, I think about the research where, one of the things that most, couples argue about is money. So
come on! I don't know what you're talking about.
So are there some differences there? But what about are there differences perhaps in income levels or socioeconomic status, women of color? I just wonder, if you kind of drill down deeper into the data, if there are other, differences as well.
Yeah, absolutely. So certainly women of color have a higher economic anxiety index than white women or than the general population. In terms of other demographics, we generally see that African Americans and Hispanics score higher on the economic anxiety index scale. I haven't looked into single versus married women. That would be really interesting to take a look at. So that would be something that I'll have to go back and take a look and see if there's any differences there.
I think what we see here is, one of the things I find interesting is that Edison Research, of course, is known for its exit polls, and that's political. And now we're finding that you guys, and through your partnership, do so much more. Do you see any political implications for this? Do you walk it across the hall and show some of the political folks in your shop what's going on with this?
Absolutely. So I think, certainly in our line of work, but in almost, every way, it's hard not to look at things through a political lens. And so first off, we do know that, and we see from our survey that women are more likely to identify as Democrats. So that's something to keep in mind right off the bat, is that women are more likely to be Democrats. And as you mentioned, we conduct the exit polls on Election Day, and we just saw that the largest gender gap in history since we've been measuring this, since we've been conducting exit polls, the difference between how women voted and men voted in terms of for Democrats nationally and Republicans nationally is the largest that we've measured it, with women much more likely to vote for a Democratic congressperson than men.
And that doesn't seem to be going away anytime soon.
Right.
And also the number of women who are throwing their their hats into the political ring as well. And I don't think this is going to go away anytime soon, and we'll certainly see how this anxiety may play out in the polls, not just the pre-election ones, but the electoral ones as well. Thank you very much, Mary. We very much appreciate your time and your interesting research and your take on it.
Sure. I'm happy to be here. Thanks so much for having me.
Hey, and say hi to Kai Risdall for us over at Market.
Oh, we will. I absolutely will.
And that will do it for this edition of Poll Hub. Poll Hub is a production of the Marist Poll at Marist College in Poughkeepsie, New York. And as always, we like to thank our wonderful executive producer, our boss, Mary Griffith,
Yay.
who keeps us all on track, sort of. She tries. And also a shout out to Kenny Marples, our producer and editor today.
And we'd like to thank we didn't give a shout out. Yay for Kenny there. Okay, good. And so we'd like to also thank the Roper Center Archives at Cornell, as we always do. They provide us with the ability to look back in time at survey questions and the results over the decades.
And
Good
we
stuff.
love, sorry about that. We love hearing from you as well. Send your questions to us. The best way is by social media, actually. You can tweet right at us at Marist Poll or on Facebook, and we answer those questions when they come at us on this show and directly, depending on what kind of questions they are. Also, subscribe. There's a subscribe button next to where you're listening to this podcast. And as we've mentioned a few times, you can review and rate podcasts, and we'd love if you do that because as people look at their vast number of possible podcasts to subscribe to and listen to, it's a little difficult to pick and choose among them. And your reviews can help, especially if they're good ones. But hey, we're not putting our
If
fingers
they're
on the scale.
listening, though, they already have made that critical moment, critical choice.
They have, so they might as well go ahead and give us a review, a nice review. If
I
that
feel like I'm at a
seems
fast
warranted.
food place when they ask,
And
Okay.
we believe in polls
Yes.
and public opinion.
there you go.
All right, we'll see you next week.